Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have an interesting scenario to go through for the 2026 governor elections. And this video is going to be focusing on what I think the Democrats is their best realistic scenario for the 2026 governor elections. Now, don't worry, I do plan on doing another video as well for the Republicans' best case scenario, so that should be coming out in a few days as well. But this video is going to be focusing on what I think the Democrats' best case is for the 26 governor map. So starting out, there are a handful of governor's races that, based on recent election results in the governor elections from 2022, 2018, and from the presidential election of 2024, we have a pretty strong indicator of how these races are going to go. And I'll start first for the states that I view as safe for the Democrats in this scenario. A lot of these states are going to be safe already just based on how the election is currently going. California is certainly going to be a safe state. Safe meaning more than 15% margin of victory. Fully expect California will be that state. Oregon, though it was very competitive back in 2022, there was a third-party candidate getting around 9% of the vote. Assuming we don't see that again in this scenario, I think Oregon would be more than a 15% margin of victory for the Democrat Tina Kotek. Now we have the state of Colorado, where this is going to be an open race, with Jared Polis not being able to run for a third term, though U.S. Senator Michael Bennet is running for this race. And again, I think in this scenario, given how Colorado has trended over the past few election cycles, I think we see Colorado end up going safe Democratic in this scenario. Now we can move to the state of Illinois. Illinois, though it did vote under 15% in the 2022 governor's race and under 15 points in the 2024 presidential race, in a Democratic best case scenario where the midterm environment is more resembling of 2018, J.B. Pritzker, if he runs for a third term, should win the Illinois governor's race by at least 15% of the vote. Then we have the state of Maryland with Democratic Governor Wes Moore. Again, the only real scenario where he could face a challenging election here would be against Republican former Governor Larry Hogan. Wes Moore certainly capable of winning by more than 15% in the Democrats' best case scenario. Now we move to the Northeast, where we have the state of Rhode Island. Though the Democratic governor, the early polling has shown he's actually not too popular and is open to a potential primary challenge. But Rhode Island is a very Democratic state at the general election level. Rhode Island should be more than 15 points for the Democrats. Maura Healey in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is one of the most Democratic voting states in the United States from 2024 and the 2022 governor's race. Fully expect Massachusetts will be over 15% margin of victory when everything is said and done. Now, these are all states I fully expect will be 15% margin of victory or more in 2026, pretty much regardless. We also have some interesting states to talk about that I think could go over 15 points, but are sort of right around the precipice of doing so. The first state in New England is going to be the state of Connecticut. Connecticut voted just a bit shy of 15 points in 2024 in the presidential level, and the governor's races in Connecticut are usually more competitive than the presidential races. It was about a 13-point win for Ned Lamont, the Democratic governor, back in 2022. A lot of uncertainty in this race if Lamont's going to run for a third term or not. He is eligible to do so, but I think in the best case scenario, Democrats could certainly win this race by more than 15% of the vote. Pennsylvania will also be very interesting because Josh Shapiro just won here by 14.8% against Doug Mastriano in 2022, so only about 0.2% away from breaking 15%. Now, Shapiro does hold very strong approval ratings in the state of Pennsylvania, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The question will be, though, can Republican candidate Stacey Garrity do a better job than Doug Mastriano did? I personally think that she will, and this will be under 15% of the vote. But in the Democrats' best case scenario, it is at very least possible that Shapiro could break 15% of the vote, but certainly on a much less scale than we see out of like Massachusetts or Connecticut or Rhode Island. For now, I'm putting it just barely in likely Democratic, but that is basically a 15-point win. Now, another state that's very interesting is the state of Vermont, because this is Republican Governor Phil Scott. He is very much a very liberal Republican, frequently critiques President Trump, and is very well liked by the very Democratic state of Vermont. Every election he has been in for a while now, he has won by a very large margin. Going back to 2018 was the last time he did not win by more than 15 points, and that was albeit very, very narrowly. 2016, he won by about 8.7 points. 2014, the Democrat Shumlin defeated the other Republican Milne by 1.3%. So for some reason, the liberal Republicans running in Vermont are able to do very well in the state when the Democrats have such a stranglehold on Vermont when it comes to the presidential and governor elections. So if for some reason Phil Scott decided not to run for re-election in 2026, I actually think Vermont would start out in the likely Democratic category due to the fact that Vermont at the governor level just seems to be a lot more competitive than it is at the presidential level. But still, if Scott did not win, the Democrats would certainly be in for a very big possible flip. Now we have the state of Maine. In the Northeast, this is currently held by Democrat Janet Mills. She recently won the state by 13.2% in 2022 against former Governor Paul LePage. This is going to be an open race, though, as she is term limited. Maine has had a very lengthy history of being a likely Democratic state now across the presidential and governor elections. The Senate level with Susan Collins and Angus King, it's a little bit more complicated, but in the Democrats' best case scenario, I think we'd expect Maine to be at least in the likely Democratic category without really too much of a competition there. But in reality, we'll have to wait and see how that one goes. In the state of New York, this is Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul. She looks like to be facing off against Republican Elise Stefanik. Now, this was a close race back in 2022, with Kathy Hochul winning by 6.4% against Lee Zeldin. Still, 6.4% would be considered a likely Democratic win. And I think in the Democrats' best case scenario, Kathy Hochul could easily break 10% margin of victory, but I do think it remains under 15. It would be a likely Democratic win. That puts the Democrats up to 12. Republicans thus far still have not assigned any races yet. That will be changing very soon, though. I just realized I also missed the state of Hawaii. That will definitely be a safe Democratic win, without a doubt, over 15%. Now, another state that I think would start out in the likely Democratic column would be the state of New Mexico. New Mexico, back in 2022, voted for Democrat Governor Grisham by 6.4%. This will be an open race, as Grisham is term limited, though New Mexico being likely Democratic in 2022. President, also Democratic, likely Democratic at 6 points. We're more likely than not going to see the state go likely Democratic for the Dems in 2026. The question will be in the margin, and the Democrats' best case scenario, an over 10-point win, is certainly very possible. Now, the last Democratic state that I think for sure is going to be likely Democratic is the state of Minnesota. Minnesota, this is Governor Tim Walz, famously being the vice presidential running mate for Kamala Harris back in 2024. He won in 2022 by 7.7% against the Republican Scott Jensen. Now, I do believe Jensen is running again, so we may see a rematch of Walz versus Jensen. I don't believe Walz has officially said he's running, but my guess would be that he would run. And if he did, we could see a rematch of Walz versus Jensen, where Walz could win by more than 5 points, under 15, putting Minnesota as likely Democratic. And I think at this point so far, this is all relatively pretty reasonable for what the Democrats could actually do in 2026. Now, there are a handful of Republican states that there are governor elections that are up that I really don't think the Democrats have any chance at actually winning. So don't think this is going to be a Democrats just win every single governor's race video. Even in their best case scenario, there are still a lot of states Republicans are going to win. These states are Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska. Now that Dan Osborne is running for Senate, not governor, this will be a safe win. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, and I would throw South Carolina and Florida in there in the likely Republican category, just being a bit shy of that margin under 15%. But I think we see South Carolina and Florida remain red pretty much no matter what. Now, Texas Democrats, I'm sure, would love to try and contest, especially in their best case scenario. But I think with Greg Abbott running for another term, or this be his fourth or his fifth term, he has shown an ability to win very competitive elections in the state of Texas, last winning by 10.9%. Even in the Democrats' best case scenario, where everything kind of goes their way, I still think we see Greg Abbott hold on and win by at least 5% in the Lone Star State. That would get the Republicans up to 11 governor's races. Now we're getting into some states that could actually potentially be competitive. I'll start with the state of New Hampshire. This is Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte. She just got elected in 2024. She defeated the Democrat Joyce Craig here by about 9 points. So that was a likely Democratic win. Now, Republicans seem to do, especially Chris Sununu and Kelly Ayotte, do very well at the governor level in the state of New Hampshire, much better than Republicans do federally in New Hampshire, the Senate, and presidential and House level. So I don't think Kelly Ayotte's going to lose his governor's race, even in the Democrats' best case scenario. But in the Democrats, if they had a big enough wave election, I do think it at very least is possible Ayotte could win by just a bit under 5%. But I do think she would hold on and win that governor's race, even in the Democrats' best case scenario. So that is the state of New Hampshire. Now the state of Alaska, because Alaska is a very fascinating state. Alaska right now, this is Republican Governor Mike Dunleavy. He is term limited and cannot run again. And this race is very wide open. There are a lot of Republicans running, including the Lieutenant Governor, Nancy Dahlstrom. You also have potential U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski maybe running for this race. The Democrats, Tom Begich, the former minority leader of the Alaska Senate and uncle of U.S. Representative Nick Begich, is running in this race. Former U.S. Representative Mary Peltola is also listed as a potential candidate, though it seems to be more indications that she may be running for Senate rather than running for governor. This race right now is currently listed as solid for the Republicans, or likely for the Republicans, but the hypothetical polling where Peltola runs shows a real possibility that the Democrat could actually win this governor's race. So it really depends on which Democrat it ends up being, because when you look at the recent election history in the state of Alaska, there actually is some potential for this race for it being very competitive. 2022, Dunleavy won by a safe margin. 2018, Dunleavy won by 7 points. Back in 2014, the independent Bill Walker defeated the Republican Parnell by 2.2%. 2010, it went for the Republican Parnell by 21 points. Back in 2006, it was Republican for Sarah Palin by only about 7.4. So Alaska has shown at very least a willingness to be a little bit competitive. I think in this scenario, for the Democrats' best case scenario, Mary Peltola would have to narrowly decide to run for governor instead of running for Senate. And in that case scenario, Peltola would win this race by a lean Democratic margin in between a 5 and 1%. It is possible she could win by more than that in the general election, even maybe bumping it up to likely Democrat, but I think she would have to win by probably a lean margin. Now, that being said, if Peltola were not the Democratic candidate, I think we would still see the Republicans probably hold on to this race by under 5 points. But for the sake of this video, we'll say Peltola ultimately runs and wins this race in the lean Democratic column. It's not really so much so about a detriment on the Republicans, as much so as Mary Peltola is such a strong, unique candidate for the state of Alaska. Now, we can move on to some other states where the Democrats are going to look to contest. And some of these are going to be very familiar states in terms of the competitive election states for 2024, starting with the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin, this is going to be Democratic Governor Tony Evers. He is not running for re-election, so it is an open race in the 2026 election cycle, but this is going to be one of the closest watched states in the entire country. The Lieutenant Governor, Sarah Rodriguez, is running. Lots of other Democrats have expressed interest in running, including Mandela Barnes, David Crowley, Francesca Hahn, Cavalier Johnson, Kelda Royce, and several other Democrats, including the Attorney General Josh Kaul, are listed as potential candidates. This is going to be one of the closest races in the entire country to watch. The Republicans also wide open at this current point in time for who could be running. It's going to be a toss-up without a doubt. The recent election history at the governor level, though, Tony Evers won in 2022 by 3.4%, and in 2018 defeated Scott Walker by 1.1%. This at the same time where we saw President Trump win the state by under 1 point in 2024, and Biden win the state by under 1 in 2020. Trump won the state by under 1 in 2016. So I think even in the Democrats' best case scenario, we're going to see a competitive election in the state of Wisconsin. But I do think for now, it does start out in the Democrat scenario as lean for the Democrats. Now, this is probably where it starts out anyway, but I think it's going to be very close, but the Democrats, certainly in their best case, could win this race. Now we move on to the state of Michigan, where Michigan, this is going to be an open race as well. Gretchen Whitmer is term limited, and this is a very fascinating race due to the fact that independent Mayor Mike Duggan of Detroit is running for governor, and he seems to be taking a good amount of votes away from both the Democrats and the Republicans in the early polling, where right now, despite it being listed as a toss-up, the Democrat seems to be leading the Republican by about 1 to 5 points or so, where independent Duggan is taking about 22-21% of the vote. This is going to be a very close, fascinating race to watch for. In the Democrats' best case scenario, I again think it falls under 5%, but I think due to the vote splitting mainly, but I do think we could see the Democrats winning in Michigan without a doubt. So that puts the Democrats up to 18. Now we're getting to some states that are also very competitive in the 2024 election, starting with the state of Georgia. Georgia, this is going to be an open race as Brian Kemp cannot run again due to being term limited. Chris Carr and Burt Jones are both running on the Republican side. Democrats still have a little bit of unclarity on who's going to be their nominee. Stacey Abrams, the former nominee from 2022 and 2018, have expressed interest in running. Keisha Lance Bottoms, the former mayor of Atlanta, is running in this race. This is going to be a very close competitive race as well. Toss-up from Cook Politico. Inside Elections has it as tilt Republican as well. Now, one thing that's going on with this race that's going to be very interesting to watch, though Brian Kemp won it by 7.5 points in 2022, he only won it against Abrams by 1.4% in 2018. And we could see a similar midterm election environment in this scenario to 2018 and 2026. It should be worth noting at the Senate level, the two Democratic senators, Raphael Warnock, won by lean Democratic margins in 2022, and Ossoff won by 1.2%, Warnock 2.1% in 2020. We also saw in 2020 Joe Biden win the state by 0.24%. Trump won it by 2.2% in 2024. So I think for the Democrats' best case scenario, I think the Democrats could win this governor's race, and they could do so by a lean Democratic margin. Again, I don't think we're going to see more than a 5% victory, though. Even in the best case scenarios, I think Georgia is going to be very close. But Democrats certainly could win the state of Georgia. Now the state of Arizona. This is going to be Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs running for re-election. She'll be facing off against either Republican Andy Biggs or Karen Taylor Robson. And this is a situation where this is going to be a close race, but electability questions that hurt Kari Lake in 2022 could potentially aid Katie Hobbs in this race against maybe Andy Biggs or Karen Taylor Robson as well. The early polling, though it shows to be a toss-up race, has had Katie Hobbs leading over Andy Biggs and Karen Taylor Robson from anywhere from about 2 to 3%, depending on the poll that you're looking at. So for Arizona right now, based on the early results, this race already starts out in the lean Democratic category, and I think that's where I would ultimately end up finishing in the Democrats' best case scenario. This has the Democrats up to 20 governor's races, Republicans up to 12. With one more state that in the Democrats' best case scenario, I'm very confident the Democrats could win. That would be the state of Nevada, where this is a Republican incumbent governor, Joe Lombardo, who just in 2022 defeated Democratic Governor Steve Sisolak to win this race. Now, Attorney General of the state of Nevada, Aaron Ford, is running on the Democratic side, and the former governor, Steve Sisolak, has also expressed interest in potentially running again. Though Aaron Ford already has the endorsement of the two Democratic senators of Nevada, Jackie Rosen and Catherine Cortez Masto, and 3 U.S. representatives in Stephen Horsford, Susie Lee, and Dina Titus. So it seems in the Democratic primary, unless Sisolak jumps in, that Ford probably has this locked up. Now, this race, despite being very close, is listed as being a slight advantage for the Republicans. And we did also just see, worth noting, obviously in 2024, President Trump won the state by about 3 points over Kamala Harris. At the governor level in 2022, Lombardo won against Sisolak by 1.5%. But I do think Nevada is still a very close competitive state that in the Democrats' best case scenario, the Democrats could narrowly win by more than 1 point, but under 5 points. And a large reason being could be the situations happening in Las Vegas now, where there are business reports that Vegas is having problems with tourism and money and such, and that could potentially hurt with unemployment, and that may give the Democrats a potential opening in that race. In the Democrats' best case scenario, they could pull out a narrow victory in Nevada. Now, we have 3 governor's races remaining. 3 of them are in states that President Trump won by pretty large margins in 2024. But Kansas is a state currently held by a Democratic governor in Laura Kelly, who she won back in 2022 for re-election by about 2.2% against the Republican Schmidt. 2018, she won by a much larger margin, about 5 points, against the Republican Chris Kobach with a lot of third-party vote after a very unpopular Republican governor administration in the state of Kansas. So Kansas, I can't officially rule out and say this is an automatic Republican flip in the Democrats' best case scenario because the governor of Kansas has won it 2 terms in a row now. At the same time, I'd be very shocked, even in the Democrats' best case scenario, if the Democrats were able to hold on to the Kansas governor's race. But one of the Democratic candidates in this race already has the endorsement of the governor in the Democratic primary. This is Ethan Corson, the state senator, has the endorsement of Governor Laura Kelly. So this could become a very competitive race if ultimately everything goes the Democrats' way, like it did back in 2018, where maybe the Democrats could eke out a under 1% margin of victory in the state of Kansas. Now, this is going to be a very big if, as Kansas is still a pretty red state, despite having a Democratic governor, but I think this is one that certainly could happen and kind of shock everyone like it did back in 2018. Now, for the Democrats, in Iowa and Ohio, this is going to be a little bit of a different story because these states are probably equally as red to Kansas in terms of presidential levels, but when it comes to the governor levels, this is going to be probably a little bit more favored for the Republicans. Iowa, Rob Sand is one of the best Democratic candidates the Democrats have fielded for the governor elections in 2026, while at the same time, also worth noting that Iowa is still probably a pretty reliable red state. Democrats would love to win Iowa in this election scenario. And maybe it's possible when everything is said and done that they could. But I still think right now, in the best case scenario for Democrats, Iowa, at worst for the Republicans, would be about a 1-point victory. I don't think, without Kim Reynolds in this race, the Democrats are going to be able to win the governor's race in Iowa. But at very least, it will be competitive in the Democrats' best case scenario. Now for the state of Ohio, Vivek Ramaswamy, he could be facing off against either U.S. Representative Tim Ryan or potentially Democrat Amy Acton. I think we see Sherrod Brown announced he is running for Senate in Ohio. So that is certainly a major, I would say, bullet dodge for the Republicans and Vivek in Ohio. Ohio also being a likely Republican state, I think we see it stay Republican for Vivek versus Tim Ryan, but I think we see it remain in between 1% and 5%, even in the Democrats' best case scenario. So in the best case scenario I can come up with for the Democrats, I have them winning about 22 governor's races, Republicans winning about 14, with some very close calls in Kansas, Iowa, and Ohio as potential pickup opportunities for the Democrats as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we have some very important news out of New York and out of New York City, where Mayor Eric Adams says he is staying in the New York City mayoral race amid the talk of him potentially dropping out of the race and joining the Trump administration. So, if this is the first time you're hearing about this, the background of this news is that the New York City mayor race is going on right now. And President Trump made a comment a few days ago saying essentially he would not like to see a communist be the mayor of New York City, referring to obviously Democrat Zohran Mamdani, who's currently the favorite to become the next mayor of New York City. Trump has made a few statements on Mamdani before, calling him a communist and such, and will be a terrible mayor for New York City. Trump's obviously home city, and this is where things are starting to develop in this race, where Trump seems to be putting a little bit more of a emphasis in him injecting himself into the race a bit. Trump recently, the rumor has been, is that he's been trying to court Eric Adams and Republican Curtis Sliwa to exit the race and throw their support behind Andrew Cuomo, who's currently viewed as the best alternative to defeating Mamdani in the general election. Now, Eric Adams, in a press conference around 4:30 p.m. on Friday, released a statement saying that he is staying in the New York City mayoral race. He also went after Cuomo in this statement where he said essentially that Cuomo is a snake who cannot be trusted. So this is obviously very significant news for a race that is continue to developing here. Because this mayoral race for 2025, the way things currently stand, with Eric Adams, Zohran Mamdani, Curtis Sliwa, and Andrew Cuomo all in this race, it clearly shows that Zohran Mamdani is the frontrunner and is going to become the next mayor of New York City. Now, there has been a little bit of movement, which is that one of the independent candidates that was running, Jim Waldron, has officially withdrew from the race, and he said in his withdrawal announcement he encourages other third-party candidates to also get out of the race to coalesce around one candidate to take on Mamdani. But with respect to Jim Waldron, he was polling around 1%, 2%, 3% in most polls. Nothing really significant enough to make a massive impact in this race. Also new since the last time I covered this race, there is now a polling aggregate for the New York City mayoral race from Real Clear Politics, which shows Zohran Mamdani at 38.2%, leading by 15% over his next closest rival, Andrew Cuomo, at 23.2%. Curtis Sliwa is polling in third at 16.6%, Eric Adams in fourth at 10.6%, with 11.4% saying they are undecided or currently supporting another choice. So this race is a really interesting one that is going on here. Because based on where Zohran Mamdani is currently at, around the high 30s to low 40s, depending on the poll that you're looking at, Mamdani right now, just based on the math that's out there, assuming the polls are correct, there is not a pathway to victory in the way the race is currently going for any one of these candidates to defeat Mamdani. He has a high floor of support in the 30s to 40% or so, and with the other three candidates splitting the anti-Mamdani vote, there's just not enough votes out there to catch Mamdani, which is why you see calls of Eric Adams and Curtis Sliwa to drop out of the race, and President Trump starting to inject himself in the race in hopes of getting Adams and potentially Sliwa out. And it's interesting because Trump obviously does not really have much love with Andrew Cuomo, someone he's known for a very long time, someone that are on vastly different political spectrums by politically when it comes to issues. But Trump also looks at the polls that we're looking at in this video, and it clearly shows. In the head-to-head matchup of Cuomo versus Mamdani, Cuomo is the only one that not only has a chance of beating Mamdani, but it's the only one that probably even comes close to having that possibility. And it shows in the polling average, Cuomo was clearly the second choice candidate now, next to Mamdani. Curtis Sliwa, the Republican, is polling in third at 16.6%. Now, Sliwa is a very interesting case in this Republican primary because unlike a lot of races where we see the Republican being a very pro-Trump Republican that basically want to please the president every way they can, Sliwa has gone multiple times now with statements being very vocal that he is not a necessarily pro-Trump Republican. He's more of a anti-Trump Republican or so, and doesn't really care if the president wants him to drop out of the race, and he said he's going to stay in it pretty much no matter what. So that alone may be signing a potential death warrant on stopping Zohran Mamdani if Curtis Sliwa stays in the race. But President Trump right now is focusing on trying to get Eric Adams out of the race. And Eric Adams and President Trump, I believe the Trump administration did try and help out Eric Adams earlier on when Trump first took office. I'm not 100% sure on all the details of that, so if you want to look into all that, go ahead. I don't want to say anything that's false or not true or anything, but I do believe the Trump administration and Mayor Adams at the start of Trump's second term did have something to do with New York City and with ICE, but again, I'm not totally sure, but make sure to go check that out. But Trump sees that 10.6% that Adams currently has in the polling average, and if that support were to drop out of the race and either go into undecided or let's just say go for Andrew Cuomo, that would get Cuomo up to about 33.8%. He would be within about 5 points of Andrew Cuomo and Zohran Mamdani, about a 5-point race between the two of them. So with Sliwa still in the race and 11.4% undecided, Cuomo would need to win a lot of that undecided vote to win, but it would be more mathematically possible than it currently is in this current situation. Now, if Curtis Sliwa also dropped out of the race, he seems to be getting more support than Eric Adams is right now, and gave his endorsement to Andrew Cuomo. That would give Cuomo a much stronger chance at defeating Mamdani. But again, Sliwa has said he will not drop out, and now Eric Adams has also said he will not drop out. And the polls, like the Tolchin Research poll, which shows what a head-to-head matchup could look like between Mamdani and Adams, shows a 3-point lead for Zohran Mamdani with 13% undecided. So in that hypothetical scenario, it is necessarily possible for Adams to catch Mamdani in that race. But when it's Cuomo versus Mamdani, it's a very big win for Cuomo getting a 11% win with still 7% undecided. But there seems to be more certainty that when it's Cuomo versus Mamdani, there's a much better chance of Mamdani losing. Now, the Gotham polling and analytics poll shows a little bit of a different story here. When it becomes Mamdani versus Cuomo, Mamdani still leads by 11 points over Cuomo. But in that one, there's 27% of voters that are undecided. But for Mamdani versus Eric Adams, it is a 24-point lead for Mamdani versus Adams. Now, this is the real problem that Eric Adams faces in this race and why he's having to run as an independent in this current race right now, which is Eric Adams is extremely unpopular among the men and women of New York City. His polling numbers are not good. His approval polls are not good. They are so bad even among Democrats that he had to run for as an independent because he had no chance of winning the Democratic primary. So Eric Adams could do more good in this race by dropping out and endorsing Andrew Cuomo and giving him a fighting chance against Zohran Mamdani, even if Curtis Sliwa did not drop out. But if Sliwa did, that would certainly give Cuomo a much better chance. But with Eric Adams' statements today, but I'm not dropping out, and calling Cuomo a snake, that pretty much gives any chance of that out the window. Now, elections are obviously very volatile. I expect President Trump will try and keep the pressure up on Adams and Sliwa to get them out of the race to support Cuomo. But if President Trump is unsuccessful in doing so, and Adams and Sliwa stay in this race, this is going to be a Zohran Mamdani victory in early November of 2025. But still, I'm covering this race because this is very fascinating. It's very interesting to see a race in New York City being this competitive, because typically it's one Democrat versus one Republican, and it's a massive Democratic win. But in this one, with two Democrats essentially running as third-party candidates, and Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic nominee, and then Curtis Sliwa, the Republican, this is a much more competitive race than we're used to seeing in New York City, and it's certainly one that I'm very keeping a close eye on because of how close and competitive this could be. So for now, Adams and Sliwa are staying in the race. Andrew Cuomo is still second place, but Zohran Mamdani is favored to become the next mayor of New York City. But if anything changes, I will do a future video updating on everything that is going on. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Also, make sure to leave a comment below if you have any comments or questions that you would like to leave. I always check those out, so make sure to do that. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2025 New Jersey governor election, and we're looking at a new poll from the TIPP Insights, which is sponsored by the League of American Workers. Now, this is a Republican-affiliated poll, so you certainly do have to take these numbers I'm about to say with a grain of salt, as they could potentially be inflating the Republican Jack Ciattarelli's numbers. It doesn't always 100% work that way, but most of the time, it's overvaluing the Republican by about 3 to 4 points or so. And in this poll, it shows that Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat, has 46%, Jack Ciattarelli has 39%, 2% are other candidates, and 12% undecided. And this is among likely voters. So this is very interesting, about a 7-point lead for Sherrill over Ciattarelli. Now, what's interesting here is that in a Republican poll, it shows Jack Ciattarelli is still having a bit of problems getting a high floor of support so far, but this is pretty much in line with the polling averages from Real Clear Politics and Race to the White House, where Ciattarelli is getting 37.7% in the Real Clear Politics one and 39.6% in the Race to the White House average, where the Democrat Mikey Sherrill is starting out with a much higher floor of support at 46% in Real Clear Politics and 47.1%. So this race for New Jersey in 2025, I was looking back at the polling data from the 2021 New Jersey governor's race and noticed something very similar. Obviously, we only know the numbers at the end of that cycle for New Jersey in 2021, but it ended with the Democratic governor Phil Murphy at a 7.8% lead in the average, getting 50.5%, Ciattarelli 42.7%, with 6.8% undecided. Now, obviously, this was in between October 15 to 31, and the dates updated as of November 1st, 2021. So this is after a lot of undecided vote was ultimately made up, because again, 6.8% were still undecided or other going into this race. When we look at it today, there's still a lot more undecided vote, about 10% more undecided based on the Real Clear Politics average compared to what it ended up being for 2021. But when you look at the numbers here, Mikey Sherrill leading by 8.3% in Real Clear Politics, that is an even larger lead than what we ultimately saw from 2021, where Murphy was leading by 7.8%. Now, I think there's a little bit of good news for Ciattarelli here, but there is a lot more good news for the Democrat Mikey Sherrill. The good news for Jack Ciattarelli is Mikey Sherrill is polling around 46% in the average, and that gives Ciattarelli an opening, because 46% in the state of New Jersey, based on what Ciattarelli did back in 2021, where he got about 48%, is a little bit of an opening for Ciattarelli if he can get enough undecided vote to get enough votes to win this race. The question will be, though, can Ciattarelli do that? Because this race in New Jersey is very interesting for a few reasons. One of them being, in 2021, this was an election where President Joe Biden was obviously a Democrat, and his approval rating started getting really unpopular around September, October, and heading into November, which obviously played a very important role on this governor's race. But even still, with all that, even though New Jersey certainly trended a lot more to the Republican side in 2021 and in the 2024 presidential election, the Democratic governor Phil Murphy still did win by 3.2%, 51.2 to 48% for Jack Ciattarelli. And this was in the anti-Joe Biden year. Now, not every election is exactly the same and exactly comparable, but this election, Jack Ciattarelli is looking at his map from 2021 and saying, okay, well, where can I expand? You're looking at places like Bergen County, like Passaic County, and you're hoping, can Ciattarelli make up margins in these areas to expand on this race and make it closer? Whereas the early polling data thus far seems to suggest things are actually slightly more favorable for the Democrat Mikey Sherrill at this current point in time. Now, this poll here towards the end of August 25th of 2028, when we look at the polling from 2021, do we have any direct comparables around the end of August? One from Fabrizio Lee and Associates, the top presidential pollster for Donald Trump, showed about a 2-point race between Murphy and Ciattarelli. But again, as this is the top Republican pollster, not really too much to take away here. Monmouth University showed Murphy up 51 to 38, with 9% still undecided, 3% saying other. If all that undecided vote went for Chiarelli, it would have ended up being about 51-47, almost in line with the result ended up being. But you look at some of the numbers Phil Murphy was getting in this race. Phil Murphy was getting around 50% into the final few weeks of the polls in New Jersey. So on the Democratic side, they certainly were missing on Jack Ciattarelli's support, but the Democrat was getting right around what he ended up actually getting, around the 51% or so. But Ciattarelli was in the low to mid 40s, having a trouble coalescing support. The polling data thus far for 2025 shows, again, a lot of undecided votes, with Jack Ciattarelli struggling to coalesce Republican support. He's polling anywhere from the mid to high 30s to the low 40% in the polls. Just a quick look here, the highest number we've seen Ciattarelli get comes from this TIP Insights poll, which is among regular voters, where he gets 43%. So clearly there's a lot of undecided vote left in this race. But Mikey Sherrill, currently getting around 46-47%, shows this race is still very much open. But at the same time, it looks like Mikey Sherrill is leading in this race, and by a pretty significant margin. This is about an 8 to 9 point lead for Mikey Sherrill over Jack Ciattarelli right now. The only way that Mikey Sherrill at this current point in time would really be concerned in this race would be if we're getting to the end of October and these numbers have not changed. If Sherrill's continuing to be around 46-47% come the end of October, that would be a sign of there could be a potential upset underway in the state of New Jersey, because if the polling last time was accurate, that the Democrat was getting around 50%, that's what they ended up getting, that could be a potential worrying sign. But it's also worth noting, Mikey Sherrill at this current point in time is leading by 8.3%, and there's still a lot of undecided vote. And let's just say the 16.3%. Well, let's do a little bit of math here. Mikey Sherrill needs about 4% of those undecided votes to get to 50% of the vote. Jack Ciattarelli, based on the way the race is currently going, needs around 12 to 13% to get around that margin. So based on the polling, just on the polling alone, there's more undecideds that Ciattarelli needs to win than Sherrill needs to win. Now, the good news for 2021 was that of the undecided voters that were remaining at the time, of the 6.8%, Ciattarelli ended up winning roughly around 6% of them, or a little bit under 6% of them, to get up to about 48%. Phil Murphy only won about 0.7% of them. So if the undecideds brokered Ciattarelli the same way they did by margins-wise, like they did in 2021 as they did in 2025, there's a real opening for Ciattarelli to win this race. But that was an election environment that typically favors the party not in charge of the White House, being the Republicans in that one. This time around, it's the Republican Party in charge of the White House. So for Jack Ciattarelli to do that, not only is it in a state that ultimately voted for the Democrats in 2024, but Ciattarelli is running in that state that this election environment should go the opposite of how it went in 2021. So New Jersey would have to break the historical trend of the off party of the White House doing well in the governor elections in New Jersey in 2025. Ciattarelli would have to break history and break it by a considerable enough margin for that race to ultimately go his way. So right now, I think a lot of talk about this race is being that this race is essentially over and that Ciattarelli can't win. And I don't think I would go that far, because I think there is still a very large amount of undecided voters at this current point in time of this race, and the polling clearly shows this. But to say that Mikey Sherrill is not leading the race at this time is, I think, very inaccurate, because I do think Mikey Sherrill is leading, and I think if the election were held today, she would become the next governor of New Jersey. But there is a lot of undecided vote out there with a lot of support missing for Jack Ciattarelli. The question will be, though, what ends up happening with Ciattarelli. Because the last two governor elections we've seen in the state of New Jersey show two very different results. In 2021, Jack Ciattarelli got up to 48% of the vote and was in a very close competitive election in that anti-democratic presidential wave year. But Ciattarelli got up to 48%. Now, though, we could also look at what the election looked like in 2021. The Republican Kim Godano only got up to 42.2%. Phil Murphy got 55.7%. Now, it is worth noting, though, this 13-point victory from Phil Murphy was after 2 terms of Chris Christie being governor of New Jersey, and Christie did leave office with pretty poor approval ratings. So this time around, Phil Murphy is the outgoing governor. His approval ratings are relatively pretty split. He does have a little bit more unpopular than popular in New Jersey, but nowhere near the levels that Chris Christie had in New Jersey when he was leaving office. So I don't think we see anything like a 13-point Democratic victory in the governor's race in New Jersey. But what can Jack Ciattarelli do? He got up to 48% in 2021. The Republican only got about 42% in 2017. But for Ciattarelli to win this race, he's likely going to have to break that 48% that he got in 2021 against Mikey Sherrill to win this race. It's possible he could get lucky if one of the Libertarian candidates, Vic Kaplan, or Socialist Workers candidates, Joanne Kunansky, if one of them is able to get 3 or 4% third-party vote and take that vote away from Mikey Sherrill, that could give Jack Ciattarelli a little bit of an opening. But that is a major hope and a major thing to bank your entire candidacy on for that to happen. So for Ciattarelli to win, he has to be aiming for around that 50% number. And right now, he has a much harder path of getting there than Mikey Sherrill does. So it's going to be very interesting here, mapping how this race goes over the next few weeks and the next 2 months or so. Because does Mikey Sherrill continue to stay around this floor of 46, 47%? But what does Jack Ciattarelli do? Is he able to replicate that 48% that he got in 2021, where it was a very close race? Or in an election environment more favorable for the Democrats, does he have a harder time? Can he not capitalize on this? And does he end up somewhere maybe in between, around 44, 45%, in between the 2017 and 2021 results? Because I don't think personally we're going to see a 2017 13-point win for Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. I just don't think that's currently in the cards at this point in time. But kind of halfway in between there, I think it's certainly on the table. Or are the polling completely off and Jack Ciattarelli could pull up an upset in New Jersey? After what we saw in New Jersey in 2024, where Kamala Harris only defeated Donald Trump by 5.9% here, what was Donald Trump's percentage in the state, though? What did President Trump end up getting? 45.9%, 46% or so, in New Jersey. We could see something very similar here in New Jersey in 2025, where Mikey Sherrill may win the governor's race by getting up to about 52% or so, like Kamala Harris did. But Jack Ciattarelli is able to not do as well as he did in 2021, but still improve on the 2017 Republican margins, getting to about 45, 46%. So this is an interesting race that I'm watching, and I want to do a little video updating on the current polling numbers. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts and all that, and I hope to see you in a future video.